Welcome to the Every Brain Matters podcast. I'm your host, Aubrey Adams. It's just pot. What's the problem? The problem is in 2018, through the federal farm bill, hemp was legalized, which legalized CBD, which allowed drug entrepreneurs to take CBD and convert it into different variants of synthetic THC. One of those variants is called Delta-8 THC. These products are sold in gas stations, dollar stores, convenient marts, and online throughout the US. These products are marketed to children, our youth, and young adults with sugary candies and flavored vapes. These products are destroying lives throughout America. Today, we talk to Travis and Kelly and hear the devastating effects of Delta-8 THC. Just one use changed their son's life and their lives forever. So welcome, Travis and Kelly. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What kind of kid was your son like? Describe what he liked to do and his personality.
I would say he's always been pretty shy, but once you got to know him, super funny, very outgoing, loved to be on the go. Since the day he was born, in the mornings, as soon as his feet hit the floor, he was, go, 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 nonstop. Great, big, huge heart, loves his family, loves his friends. Pretty social. He got pretty social as he started coming out of his shell through his, adolescent years and coming into a teenager. And he was getting where he was just really coming out of his shell a lot, which was wonderful to see because we thought for a long time he was just going to stay really reserved and very shy. How would you?
Well, so to go along with our story where we're at now, I think him being when he first got his driver's license is when he fell in love with a truck, wanted to be out. That was his whole thing. And then obviously where we're at now, we're in a different place with that because I guess we'll get into that some later. But I think the truck thing was a big deal for him, and
Yeah.
now we're not there anymore.
Yeah, his truck was, I'm glad you mentioned that because we actually bought him a truck when he turned 15 so that he would learn to drive in that vehicle and learn that vehicle, practice in that vehicle. And then when he got his driver's license, he did things to modify the truck that was his passion, is modifying it, lifting it, doing all the things. He was never a kid that got in trouble. He was never one to drink even. He was never one. He would be invited to parties and he would turn them down every single time. He never, went to parties. He very much followed the rules, curfew. His passion was his truck and going to truck meets. And just modifying constantly, lights on the truck, the sound of the truck, the sound of the music. And that was where he found his joy. And so that was very much where he shined, I would say. He should, and everybody kind of knew him for his truck, everybody knew him for what he had done to it, how good it looked. So he took a lot of pride in that.
It sounds like he really had a sense of freedom.
He did.
And Travis, when I heard you start talking about him, that you recognize he doesn't necessarily have that freedom anymore. And that's a painful thing to watch.
It sure is.
Which leads me to let's get to what happened, and I do bring that up because you know, I have been raising awareness about the harms of marijuana for many years, since 2015, when it started affecting my family. And I would debate proponents for marijuana legalization, and they would not only talk to me, but scream at me, "It's my freedom, it's my freedom." And I would say, well, I'm watching it take people's freedom away. So I
Yeah.
disagree with that statement. And I think the story you're about to tell will really be an example of what this drug can do and how it can rob your freedom. So let's get to the day or the night when your son used, and I believe he only used just one time. Take us through that day. What happened?
Okay, so I'll kind of start and you could add if you want. So it's getting close to his curfew, which it was a weekend. They were actually out for summer break. So during the summer, his curfew was midnight. As long as, we knew where he was. And we knew he had gone to a truck meet. And his truck had had a few issues where it had broken down a few times, like something went wrong with it. And it was getting close to midnight, I would say around 11:30 or so. And we had him on Life 360. And so I don't know, mother's intuition. I picked up my phone. It was close to 11:30, and I'm like, I wonder where he's at, And so I look, and he was sitting on a road not too far from our house, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And he was just sitting there, though, like he wasn't moving. I could tell it wasn't moving. And I looked at Travis and I was like, well, this is weird. Price isn't, like, he's sitting on the road and he's not moving. And I was like, I guess I should call him, make sure, he's okay. I knew he was with one of his best friends. Well, right when I went to call, the best friend that was with him started calling me. So I answered, and he was very much in a panic. And he said, they always call me Mama Kelly. He said, Mama Kelly, Price is on the phone with the 911. And I said, did y'all get in an accident? Like, what's like, I saw y'all sitting there. Are you okay? Like, are y'all talking? Like, is he talking? Like, is there? He said, we're not in an accident, but he said he doesn't feel right. And I said, and that immediately, like I had alarm bells going off, and I was like, doesn't feel right. Like, what do you mean? For him to call 911 himself and reach out, something's really wrong, because normally he would just come home, if he didn't feel well or, wasn't feeling good, whatever. So, he said he just doesn't feel good. And I said, no, you tell me what's happened. Tell me. And he's like, he took something. And I was like, okay. So I'm like, we're on the way. We are good friends with some of the police here in our community. And one called Travis and was like, I got the call in. I'm still on the phone with his best friend. We're jumping in the car. We're on the way there. And I'm like, stay on the phone with me so that I know he's alert at least, and he's still talking to the emergency. And he said he's still talking to him. He just doesn't feel right. And then I was like, I'm trying, everything was going so fast and not understanding what he took. I didn't know at this point still. And our officer friend said that it had been called in as an overdose. He was on the way to the scene the same time that we were. We pretty much met each other there. And there were several cops that came, and then the ambulance came. And when we got there, there were other kids. I guess I don't know how they knew, maybe they were falling behind him. that were kind of around the area. There was just people everywhere, and the cops were actually having to get everybody to leave because there was too many people on the road. And I'm like asking, what did he take? What did he take? What's wrong with him? Like, why is he not feeling good? And like I just had this gut feeling. And one of the kids said it was Delta-8. He had Delta-8. Well, I had never heard of it. And I don't believe my husband had either at the time. And I was like, what is Delta-8? I'm like, what is that? And the cops proceeded to tell me. They said it is it's a synthetic form of marijuana. Usually they do it like through a pen or a vape. And he said, to be honest with you, we've seen this before. And at this time, the paramedics had got there and were assessing our son. And they were talking to us, and they said, I mean, we tell them all the time, we'd much rather him just, drink alcohol or, it was like, this stuff is bad and it's so bad. And they just kept, telling us how bad it was. And, I'm panicking. So we get over to the paramedics and we see our son, and he's completely out of his mind. He is not, I mean, he was pacing around, he was crying, he was shaking, he was paranoid, he was just saying things that didn't make sense. And then he was kind of in and out of it. And then the paramedics were checking his blood pressure, his heart rate, and they kind of looked over at us and they were like, okay, we got to go now. Lights and sirens. And they said, jump in there. He had just turned 18. He wasn't even a month into being 18. And they were like, we would let you ride, but he just, turned 18. And they said, jump in here. And I knew, this is when I knew it was so serious. They said, I remember them saying, tell him to hang on. Tell him to hang on. Get in there, do it fast. They said, do it fast. We've got to go. But tell him to hang on. We're asking, like, what's going on with him? And they said he's trying to stroke and he's trying to basically go into cardiac arrest. His heart rate was up to 200 beats a minute. I cannot remember what his blood pressure was, but it was sky high. And they were afraid he was going to go into cardiac arrest. And they said, get in there, love on him, get out. I didn't realize that they had told him that we need your cell phone number because they did not think he was going to make it to the hospital. And if he didn't, they were going to call us on the way there. And so our friends who were the officers offered to escort us to the hospital. My husband said no, and he just got in the car, and somehow we beat the ambulance there, and they were pulling in, and we pulled right up to the bay, and I saw them wheel him out on the stretcher, and the paramedic came over to us and said, before you decide if there's going to be a punishment or anything, he went through, and I'll keep it without saying cuss words, he went through a heck of a lot in that ambulance. And he said some of it he's going to remember, some of it he's not. And he said, we did everything we could to save him. We're trying to get him stabilized at the moment. And he said he's going to need support more than anything. And so at this point, I didn't know exactly what all that entailed, and as I look over and they're pulling him out, at this point, I'm like tunnel vision. I can't hear anything else. I'm just, barely standing. He's kind of holding me up. And I don't know exactly for sure. We're still in the process after all this time, still trying to get the medical records. But when they pulled him out, his shirt was like lifted up, and the paddles were like laying across his stomach. And in that moment, I was just I was just like praying, and
So,
then
so
Go
just to summarize here, that night you get a phone call, you know he's in trouble because you don't see him moving on your, that app you talked about.
Mhm.
And the paramedics said he was in the process of having a stroke and in cardiac arrest.
Yes.
And he's
Mhm.
only 18 years old, and his friends are admitting that he used Delta-8 THC and synthetic THC product derived from hemp. And I need the audience who is listening to this to really understand this situation. This is a healthy, young 18-year-old. 18-year-olds do not go into cardiac arrest. 18-year-olds do not have strokes. But this product caused this for this young man, for Travis Kelly's son that night. Hear us and help us. So go ahead, Travis. What
Yeah.
what were you gonna say? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, just the fact that, him going into cardiac arrest or beginning to get to that, because we didn't realize it was that serious. His heart was just beating fast. Our first initial thing was slow down and breathe. And to hear the ambulance tell you that, we got to go, he might not make it, that's pretty tough, you know. And then when we get to the hospital and the paramedic tells you, he's been through a lot. This is not a punishment type thing. And we never would have punished. We've all tried different things in our lives, and and it just sucks that it was kind of a one-time deal, and it affected him the way it has and still is today.
Yeah, yeah. We'll get to his current status today. And I also need the viewers to hear that the paramedics were giving their son, they were trying to get his heart back in rhythm, and by using the paddles. That is very serious, and no parent would think that this drug could do something like that. And like Travis was just saying, we've all experimented, every single one of us. There's probably not, maybe a few that haven't, but I think nowadays we're in a era, I call this the new era of industrialized marijuana, where that experimentation is just not safe anymore. And so let's continue on. He's hospitalized at that point. They saved his life in the ambulance on the way to the ER. And then what happened at that point?
So the paramedics said they gotta, y'all can't go back there. This was during COVID. This was 2021. And he said, well, you can't go back there right now because they're still trying to stabilize him. We couldn't be in the room regardless, COVID or not COVID at that point, because he was still in an emergency situation. And he said, however, I'm going to stay here with you guys and kind of keep you updated and go back and forth from the room to y'all to keep you posted. When they get him stable, then a nurse is going to be able to come out and one of you can go back, only one at a time. And so we were like, okay. And, I mean, we're just in shell shock at this point. And so finally, what seemed like forever, I couldn't tell you how long it was. The paramedic came out with the nurse and she said, okay, one of you could come back here. We've got him stable. We chose for me to go back there first. As I entered the doors to where he was, I could hear him. Now before all of this, he was very mild-mannered. He was headstrong like any typical teenager, but very mild-mannered. When the doors opened and I walked back, I could hear him screaming and cussing and crying. And, it seemed like it took me forever to get to him. I couldn't get to him fast enough, but I got to him fast, but it just seemed like forever. And once I did, I mean, he was completely out of his mind. They had medicines and IVs going, I guess, to slow down his heart, and they had him on monitors. And he immediately grabbed onto me, was wrapped around me, begging me not to let him die. And he was screaming, saying that everyone in the hospital was talking about him and making fun of him, that the people beside him, they had somebody beside him that they were laughing at him, and he kept telling me to look at them and to make them stop, and he was cussing them out. He was yelling at the nurses, telling them that they weren't listening to him, they couldn't hear him, and then he would start laughing, like hysterically laughing, and then he would start crying, and then he would be terrified, and he was literally shaking from head to toe and making absolutely no sense whatsoever. He had his license for some reason in his hand, and it was in a million pieces, all over the floor. I don't know how he did that. You know how tough a license is. It was literally, we saved one of the squares that was like part of his picture. It was literally in little squares where he had in the ambulance, is what he told me. I don't know. He was gripping onto it and just breaking it. And then when he remembers, like when he got back there, he said he was so angry and he was just tearing it apart. And I don't know how he had the strength to do that, because I couldn't see her do that. I mean, you usually have to cut them and just he was all over the place, and I was back there with him for hours, and then he started, and it was just the same cycle for hours. And he didn't want me to pick up my phone because I was trying to update him on what was going on. And every time I would pick up my phone, he would go into more panic and crying and like he was pulling my phone from me, and just wanting me to hold on to him. And I was asking him, I gotta talk to your daddy. I was like, I gotta talk to daddy. At this point, I'm like talking to him, like a child, because that's the only way I could somewhat get him to relate to me and what I was saying. And he would say, don't get on the phone. And I was like, why? And he said, because everybody knows. And he was telling me God knew, and that he was gonna go to hell, and I mean, just he saw hell, and he was hallucinating so badly. His hallucinations were, I mean, he couldn't even describe them all, but what he could verbalize were just, I mean, like wild. That, like, he was telling me the person beside him had a big smile on his face like the Joker, and it wouldn't stop, and that he could hear his loud laughing, and his loud laughing sounded like a demon. And so after a little while, we were still they were just monitoring him. We were still waiting on the doctor to tell us something. Like I said, it had been several hours. He started asking for his dad. And then at that point, I was like, okay. So I asked the nurse, he was right in front of the desk, so they could, right across from the desk. And I said, he's asking for his dad. Is he allowed to come back here with him? And she said, y'all can only switch one time. So once his dad comes back here, that's it. You have to leave and you can't come back again. He can't see you again. And so that was because of COVID. And so that was even more stressful because we couldn't even be together to comfort him during this time. And in the state that he was in, we couldn't even be together to comfort each other and to try to come up with a plan and to talk to the doctors together or any of that. So that made it like a million times worse. And so he came, they finally buzzed him in to come in, and then they were like, okay, mom, you have to leave. Well, at this point, our sons, hanging on to me and not wanting me to leave. And I'm like, well, he's back here now. And they're saying I didn't know what to do. And I just had to turn around, and I had to walk out. And that was the hardest thing because, we didn't know if his vitals were going to change again, what was happening. And I just went and sat in the car and waited till I got a phone call with him. And then I'm sure he has an experience with him.
Travis, what happened at that point when you came in the room?
Well, actually, at that once I came in, he was getting to the point where I think he had wore himself down, and actually kind of crashed out for 10 to 15 minutes at a time, and was kind of getting back to a somewhat of a better spot. He still was having his moments where he would, when he would wake, he would start crying. But he was a lot more calm. And in hindsight, I was just sitting here thinking about this. We weren't educated on what Delta-8 was, didn't know what it was. So we didn't know what to ask, what to, we didn't, we were just clueless. And to be quite honest with you, and maybe they've learned a little better, it makes me believe that the hospitals weren't educated. Because, and I say that because I'm not sure exactly how long it was, but from the time I got back there till we were checked out and ready to go, it don't seem like it was an hour, maybe two at that point. So I guess looking at it now, like, yeah, we were ready to go home, but I don't think enough things were done for him. I may not call it right. Brain scans, MRI.
CAT scans.
So they discharged him right away after that?
Yes.
So once he had calmed down physically and his heart rate was back to a normal heart rate, surely they probably give him something also to slow his heart rate back down. Once all that kind of got there, it was just like, all right, you're good. You can go home. And again, we weren't educated enough to say, hold on, this is not how that's supposed to go. 3 years down the road, we're still going to be living this. No, you do something, right? We didn't know that. We were just like, buddy, you ready to go home? And he was ready to go home too, so I think the education is not, at that point, was not from a parent standpoint to a medical standpoint.
Yeah.
They didn't know it either.
They didn't. And to kind of elaborate on that, a few things from my understanding and what I have learned in research from talking to different doctors that he has seen virtually since then, it is protocol if you're bringing in a possible stroke victim to do an automatic MRI or CAT scan. You have to check their brain, whether or not they've had one or not. If you suspect any stroke activity, and they did not do that. And I think the reason for that is when they tested him and saw that it was THC in his system, because I was actually back there with him when they did that. They just chalked it up to marijuana, like when they gave us his discharge papers, he was calmer, but he was not coherent. He was still hallucinating. And the discharge papers were simply like basically go home and sleep it off. It said the side effects of smoking marijuana.
Wow.
Like, just like he had picked up a joint and rolled it and smoked it and sent us out the door, and he was still hallucinating when we left the hospital. He was still, and I keep saying that, still hallucinating, still out of his mind when he brought him out to me.
And when you were all leaving, you knew he was hallucinating. Had you even heard of the term psychosis or cannabis-induced psychosis?
Not
time?
cannabis. I've heard of psychosis, but not cannabis-induced psychosis. I had no idea what that was.
Do you think that's what your son was experiencing at that
I,
time?
I do. Absolutely.
Yeah, the way you describe his symptoms, truly. I mean, it's horrible. They pushed him out so fast, and like you said, a lack of education with the parents, but even with the medical community, I mean, here he was going into cardiac arrest, having a stroke, in psychosis, and they're like, okay, you ready to go home? I mean, this is a common thing that I hear from families. It's like they're aching to discharge them, and
Yeah.
it puts the stress on the families, and then they go home with no resources and understanding what happened here. So
Exactly.
I'm so sorry that this happened. And
It's beyond frustrating.
yeah,
I can't even describe how frustrating, and I'm not blaming anyone. Maybe they weren't educated, but I mean, they literally just pushed them out the door. They don't understand. They're not educated enough.
no, and here these products are legal through the federal government. I
Yeah.
mean, they allowed this to happen without the education to the medical communities. And then to mask the foulness of the drug,
Yeah.
the chemical taste of the drug, they put them in vapes with sugary flavoring. So when
Mm-hmm.
our kids go to consume it, they think they're consuming candy
Right.
instead of like a really foul chemical that's going to cause a chemical assault to their brain and their bodies. And it's the most deceptive thing they can do. And the fact that our government, especially our federal government, is allowing them to get away with this, it's just,
It's
I mean, just
maddening.
it's maddening. And keeping our own sanity through this process too. I mean, that's why I want the viewers to understand how courageous this family truly is telling their story. And so you brought him home, and then what happened?
So I'll tell the ride home. I don't know. On the ride home, that was horrendous. I kept trying to decide whether or not to turn around and go back because he was hallucinating and crying and going through so many ups and downs that it was unreal. Um, I mean, I was terrified, but I was like, but they just released him. So surely if we turn around, they're going to tell us he's got to sleep it off, is basically what they're saying. So it's like, maybe he does need to sleep it off. I was totally confused. And we got him home and we brought him to our bed and put him in there so that we can watch him. And he slept. He finally laid down. He slept for he woke up a little bit, almost 48 hours straight. And
Wow.
I was just like, wow. I mean, like, I think he got up to get something to drink and use the bathroom and then just laid back down. And I mean, like the deepest sleep. And I mean, we were just watching him, like, is he breathing? Every time, like, is he breathing? And then it went downhill from there. Is there anything you want to say, or do you want? So when he woke up and kind of was getting his bearings, he was calmer, he was coherent, but he looked different. You could tell his mind was racing, like he was responding to us in, a way that we could understand him, but he was totally terrified. Um, he he was scared to death. And so We, his girlfriend at the time, they're not together anymore, but stopped by to see him, and we were just kind of, telling her, she was out of town at the time, what had occurred, and he lost it. He started crying again, and went into complete panic, anxiety. He did want to sleep in his bed that next, I can't, everything's kind of all together the first couple days, but he did not want to leave his bed once he got back in his room, in his bed, which was at the time straight across from our room. He would not leave his bed except to use the restroom. And this happened for weeks.
Was he willing to eat or drink at that time, or did you have to caress him to eat and drink?
I had to make him eat. He would drink. But I had to absolutely make him eat. I called his pediatrician, and there was a point in between where you dealt with him more, because I had to go to the wedding, where he did try to leave the house before he went into pure, I guess, like a psychotic break, where we'll get into later, that he was there for, that I wasn't. I had to go be in my sister's wedding like a day or two after this happened with our son, and he was with him, and he could tell you what happened during that situation, and that was, I think, the last time he ever left the house.
Yeah, so again, not knowing where this was going to lead to, we weren't, kind of keeping a notebook on everything that happened, because part of my thought was he's going to be better next week. Once he gets himself back together, everything's going to be fine. And then a couple of days later, when a friend of his was over here, and he was going to take her home, and that would have been the first time he got back into his vehicle to drive. He got in the truck, drove out of our neighborhood, made it 200 yards down the road, and pulled over and called me and said he can't do it. He was in pure panic, hallucination at that point. I don't know if he was there, but he just was panicking. His thoughts were so, he thought he was going to die. Thought he didn't have any control. So obviously I immediately went and got him back to the house, and pretty much since then.
Mm-hmm. A friend came and picked up his truck and drove it back to the house. And then since then is where our now going into our 3-year story begins. And so I'll try to fast forward it a little bit. So he goes and he gets back, and he immediately, I get back home. I was out of town for a wedding, and he tells me what he's keeping me posted on what he's heard, and I'm trying to get back home. And so when I get back home, that's where we're back, to his bed. He is confined to his bed. He said that if he got up and moved out of his bed, he was afraid that everything he felt that night was going to happen again, that he was absolutely going to die. Every time he stood up, he felt like he was going to die, and that the only way he felt safe was laying in his bed, because he knew if he fell or if he died, he would be safe in his bed. So he absolutely would not leave it. He actually had a very good friend who was a young lady. Their friends come and sit with him throughout the day in the bed to give us a break. And I called his pediatrician. His pediatrician said, you're either going to have to get him admitted into a mental hospital or bring him in. And I said, he won't leave the house. I can't bring him in. And at this point, I was not ready to just put him into a mental hospital, because we weren't sure exactly what was happening. And so, and if an ambulance were to come and get him, if we were to call 911, he would have went and, I mean, they would have had to take him into a mental hospital. And I know that's exactly what they would have done. And that's not the treatment he needed. He needed MRIs, he needed CAT scans, he needed blood work. And so we're just like, what do we do? And so I ended up having to sleep with him for several months because he was so terrified. There was hardly any sleep. It was spurts of sleep where he would calm down enough to sleep. I would, anything that we could get him, milkshakes, anything that we could get him to try to eat, a drink. He was losing weight, of course, but just anything that we could get in his system, we were doing protein bars, a bite of a sandwich, and just trying to get in contact with anybody and everybody that would see him. He didn't want anybody to see him but the people that he picked because he didn't want he just didn't want anybody seeing him or talking to anybody. And so that went on for a long time. I mean, pretty much through the first year. It seems like the first year seemed like one whole day, if that makes sense, because everything happened so quickly. And it was just full of anxiety and breakdowns and sleepless nights and him constantly thinking he was dying. And he started having right after he came back home from the incident he had with him having to go pick him up, he started having like what was called it was like Tourette's, and we weren't sure if he was like, it wasn't a seizure, but it was where he couldn't control it, and when he was talking to you or standing in front of you, it almost looked like a dance and a jerk, and he could not do it. And he was just talking to you, and like he would do his arms constantly and do his head. And so I called the doctor about this. At this point, I had gotten in touch with psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists. And basically, it was a form of the trauma to his brain, but they couldn't say exactly what it was because we had no MRI. If it lasted, a year or more, then they would consider it a form of Tourette's due to trauma. And so he was doing that. There were, some good days, some not good days. One of the worst things when he was finally getting to a point where he would venture out of his bed just a little bit. We started, I was basically wiping him down with a rag in his bed. And
Because he wouldn't shower.
no, none at all. He was terrified. And he was terrified to go to the bathroom by himself. He would leave the door open or cracked. He wouldn't shower. He stopped showering, or any of that, bathing, and so we got to a point of trying to become creative on getting him to be clean. And somehow, I don't know how, by this time we're in the winter time, because this happened in June, we're in the winter. And he agreed to wash off a little bit in the water hose outside. It would be 40, 35 degrees outside. And he would finally got to the point where he would actually like put soap on himself and like jump in it. And my husband would kind of make it a game, and he would be like, if you'll do it, I'll do it. We'll do it together. And so he would shower outside, and it would be a quick jump in, get wet, pour some soap on him, drench him down, jump back out, wrap a towel around him, and get him back inside so he didn't get sick, because he would, and we don't know what the fear of the phobia of the shower was. We have no idea. He cannot explain it to you at this point. He still does not know to this day. So that probably went on for about a year, and we would have to literally talk him into going outside and doing that. And then so I got in touch with psychologists and therapists. We had someone come over and do a power of attorney, medical power of attorney for us, so that I could talk to the doctors and tell them what was going on during this, and that we would have his permission because he did not want to be seen on camera. Mind you, this was him going into his senior year of high school. So also, not only did we have to do that, we had to get the doctors to see him very quickly, not see him, but talk to me virtually. He would not get on the camera whatsoever. He would not even speak to them, but me explain to them what was going on. And we had to do like an emergency medical leave from school, where he was basically school, homebound, can do it online, because he, I mean, going in his senior year. And so he wouldn't get on the camera for school whatsoever. He was terrified. So all the while we're trying, his cognitive thinking was off, everything was off. His short-term memory is still very bad. So that was the struggle, getting him through his senior year. Somehow we managed to do it. He would literally be falling asleep, because he was so sleep deprived. But so the school and then the shower thing, and trying to get him to eat, and just basically coming out of his room and functioning at all probably lasted the first year, at least, if not a little more. And then it went into, like I said, I was talking to doctors and therapists. They finally, we got to a point after about a year and a half that he would start talking to his therapist like for 5 minutes, and then I would talk to him, and then we were just kind of exposing him a little bit at a time. He did do a test with a doctor. That was a 2-hour test. I was very surprised that he did it. And they came back and told us that he was possibly schizophrenic, that he was possibly bipolar, that he had some major depressive things going on, that he had PTSD, that there was definitely, they could tell that there was definitely some trauma, physical trauma to the brain, but without the MRI, they couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. But that the Tourette's syndrome he was having was from the trauma, from the vape, from whatever his brain endured during his emergency situation to the hospital, is what they were thinking. And they said that he had some so now here we are. He is working with a therapist that he does see virtually. They are trying to do some exposure therapy a little bit at a time. It's taken about a year and a half to get him to be comfortable with that. And he has not left the house. He does not take medicines. Not even a Tylenol. If a food is ordered from outside, he has to investigate the food to make sure nothing's in it. He sold his truck. Which was his pride and joy. And so right now we're in year 3 of being trapped.
Of one-time use of Delta-8 THC.
Yes.
And-
He is diagnosed with severe agoraphobia. For those out there that need to know this, they said that is the most severe case. His doctors, 3 doctors have told me this, that they have seen in like all their years of practice. And that's complete fear of the world and leaving the house.
I'm so sorry.
So,
What-
yeah.
What, we'll start with you, Travis, and then we'll go to Kelly. What do you want the world to know? What do you want the legislators to know about what happened to your son?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier too. It has no particular person it's going to affect, right? I say that because at this truck meet, there were probably multiple people that used this same pen, whatever it is, and it affected him. A kid that don't do that kind of stuff, don't smoke marijuana, don't drink, and his friends or the other people that were doing it are all running around doing whatever they want to do.
In college.
He didn't get to walk in his graduation. He didn't get to go to his sister's wedding, just because he can't leave the house. So, it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're rich, poor, whatever cars you drive, it can affect everybody, and it just, good kid, big heart, and he's stuck.
He's literally.
It does affect the whole family. I'm sure the pain of
Mhm.
your daughter not having his brother there at her wedding, you guys watching that, going to celebrate the day of your daughter's wedding, knowing your son's not there. I mean, it's just snowballs. It just the trauma of it all. And I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, and I
sharing.
thank you. And I know if I had one thing to say to the legislators, it would be these kids, these parents, or these people that are doing this think it's safe, but all it takes is the one time. The one time. You may smoke it every day of your life, and all it takes is the one time for it to flip that switch and do whatever it's going to do. You're not safe with it whatsoever. This is not safe on the shelves. We literally almost lost our son, and it's not fair. And now we're trapped. He's trapped, and we don't know what the prognosis. We don't know our future, and that's not fair.
As you can see, it's not just pot, and we have big problems. We thank Travis and Kelly for sharing their story with us today, and we pray for their son's healing. Our local, state, and federal governments are failing America's families. We must warn everybody in America and across the world of the devastating effects of today's industrialized marijuana. If you would like to help, there is a link to a letter we wrote in the description of this podcast or video. Please send that letter to your local, state, and federal governments. We must close this loophole in the 2018 Farm Bill and protect our youth. There is a lack of education and no public service announcements on the dangers of these hemp-derived synthetic THC products that were legalized through the Federal Farm Bill of 2018. We ask you to help us raise awareness and warn families across America and across the world of the dangers of Delta-8 THC and other hemp-derived products by liking, sharing, and commenting on this video or podcast. Every Brain Matters is a nonprofit community developed by families harmed by today's industrialized marijuana. Please visit everybrainmatters.org, sign up for our newsletter, and please give us a donation. We need your help.